When Travis Kalanick marched Uber into China in 2014, he believed his ride-hailing juggernaut was unstoppable. After all, Uber had conquered city after city across America and was expanding rapidly worldwide. But what Kalanick didn't anticipate was facing an opponent who understood the art of war better than Sun Tzu himself. Her name was Jean Liu, and she was about to teach Silicon Valley's golden boy that in China, local knowledge trumps global ambition every single time. This is the story of how Didi Chuxing not only survived Uber's invasion, but crushed the American giant so thoroughly that they retreated from the world's largest market with their tail between their legs, selling their China operations for a fraction of what they'd invested. The battlefield was set years before Uber even knew China existed as a market opportunity. In 2012, while Travis Kalanick was still fighting regulators in American cities, Cheng Wei was quietly launching Didi Dache in Beijing. Cheng Wei wasn't your typical startup founder. He was a former Alibaba sales manager who had spent 8 years learning from Jack Ma himself about the ruthless efficiency required to dominate Chinese markets. But the real secret weapon came in 2014 when John Liu joined as president. Liu brought something invaluable to the fight. She was the daughter of Lenovo's founder Liu Chuanji and had spent 12 years at Goldman Sachs, including time in New York. She understood both Chinese culture and American business tactics. When Uber finally entered China in February 2014, they were walking into a trap that had been years in the making. Didi had already secured partnerships with WeChat, China's super app with over 400 million users, giving them instant access to a customer base larger than the entire population of North America. While Uber was still figuring out how to spell their name in Chinese characters, Didi was processing over 1 million rides per day across 178 Chinese cities. The first phase of the war began with what locals called the Red Envelope War, and it was unlike anything the tech world had ever witnessed. Chinese consumers received their New Year bonuses in traditional red envelopes, and both companies decided to weaponize this cultural tradition. Didi launched a campaign offering passengers red envelopes worth up to 100 yuan, roughly $15, for each ride. Uber responded by offering free rides and massive discounts. But here's where Didi's local knowledge became devastating. They timed their campaign to coincide with Chinese New Year, when hundreds of millions of people travel home to their families. While Uber was offering generic promotions, Didi was offering culturally resonant gifts that felt like genuine hongbao from relatives. The psychological impact was profound. Chinese consumers weren't just getting cheap rides, they were getting respect for their traditions. Within weeks of this campaign, Didi's daily order volume exploded to over 3 million rides, while Uber struggled to break 1 million rides per day across their entire global network. But subsidies were just the opening gambit. The real war was being fought in the infrastructure trenches where most Western observers couldn't see. Uber's fundamental business model assumed that customers would use credit cards and smartphones exactly like American consumers. This was their first critical error. In 2014, less than 30% of Chinese consumers owned credit cards, and mobile payments were fragmented across dozens of platforms. Didi had spent 2 years integrating with Alipay and WeChat Pay, the two dominant mobile payment systems that together controlled over 90% of China's digital transactions. When an Uber passenger finished a ride, they often faced a clunky payment process that required manual entry of credit card information. When a Didi passenger finished a ride, payment happened automatically through apps they were already using daily for everything from buying coffee to paying utility bills. This wasn't just about convenience, it was about trust. Chinese consumers trusted Alipay and WeChat Pay because these platforms were built by Chinese companies that understood Chinese privacy concerns and regulatory requirements. Uber's insistence on processing payments through their own international system felt foreign and suspicious to local users. The talent war revealed even deeper strategic differences between American and Chinese business philosophy. Uber approached hiring in China the same way they hired everywhere else. They recruited individual superstars with impressive resumes and expected them to execute centralized strategies developed in San Francisco. Didi took the opposite approach, hiring thousands of local operators who understood the specific dynamics of their individual cities. While Uber's Beijing office was making decisions for drivers in Chengdu and Shenzhen, Didi had local teams in over 200 cities, each with deep knowledge of local traffic patterns, cultural preferences, and regulatory relationships. This decentralized approach proved devastating during the driver recruitment battles. Uber offered higher per-ride payments to drivers, but Didi offered something more valuable: local support networks. Didi's city managers organized driver meetups, helped with vehicle maintenance referrals, and most importantly, provided real-time support in local dialects. When a Didi driver in Guangzhou had a problem, they could call a support line and speak to someone who understood not just their language, but their neighborhood. When an Uber driver had a problem, they often reached a call center in another country entirely. The regulatory chess match demonstrated why Jean Liu's Goldman Sachs experience was so crucial to Didi's strategy. While Uber was fighting regulators in city after city, burning through legal fees and generating negative headlines, Liu was quietly building relationships with government officials at every level. She understood that in China's political system, success required more than just following written regulations. It required understanding the unwritten rules of Guangxi, the relationship networks that actually govern business operations. Didi sponsored government technology conferences, hired former transportation ministry officials as advisors, and most cleverly positioned their service as a solution to China's urban pollution problems. When Beijing announced aggressive targets for reducing car emissions, Didi was ready with data showing how ride sharing could reduce private vehicle ownership. When Shanghai launched smart city initiatives, Didi proposed integrated traffic management systems. Uber, meanwhile, was still hiring American lawyers and approaching Chinese regulations as obstacles to overcome rather than frameworks for collaboration. By 2015, Didi had operating permits in every major Chinese city, while Uber was still fighting regulatory battles that drained resources and management attention. The psychological warfare campaign revealed John Liu's most brilliant strategic insight. Chinese consumers weren't just choosing between two ride-hailing apps, they were choosing between supporting a Chinese company or an American one. During the height of the subsidy wars, both companies were losing enormous amounts of money on every ride. Uber was burning through approximately $1 billion per year in China, while Didi was losing similar amounts. But Liu understood that this wasn't really about profitability in the short term. It was about national economic pride. She began speaking publicly about Didi's mission to prevent foreign domination of Chinese transportation infrastructure. She highlighted the fact that Uber's profits would flow to American shareholders, while Didi's success would benefit Chinese employees, Chinese investors, and the Chinese economy. This message resonated powerfully during a period when China was increasingly assertive about technological sovereignty. When Chinese consumers chose Didi over Uber, they weren't just getting a ride, they were making a patriotic statement. Liu amplified this effect by securing investments from China's most prestigious technology companies. When Tencent and Alibaba invested in Didi, they weren't just providing capital, they were providing implicit endorsement from China's most successful entrepreneurs. The final phase of the war demonstrated the power of integrated ecosystem strategy over standalone app thinking. By 2015, Didi wasn't just a ride-hailing company. It had become a transportation platform integrated with every aspect of Chinese digital life. Through their partnership with WeChat, Didi rides could be booked without even opening a separate app. WeChat users could hail rides directly from their chat screens, the same interface they used for messaging friends and making restaurant reservations. Through their Alibaba relationships, Didi integrated with Taobao shopping, allowing customers to book rides to pick up purchases or visit stores. Most devastatingly, Didi launched Didi Express, a lower-cost service that competed directly with public transportation, and Didi Lux, a premium service that competed with traditional taxi companies. While Uber was still thinking about ride-hailing as a single product, Didi had created a comprehensive mobility ecosystem that served every transportation need and price point. Their driver network expanded beyond personal vehicles to include traditional taxis and eventually even buses and bikes. By the time Uber realized they were fighting an ecosystem war rather than an app war, Didi controlled over 80% of China's ride-hailing market. The war's conclusion came with stunning swiftness once Didi achieved critical mass. In August 2016, after burning through more than $2 billion in China, Uber announced they were selling their Chinese operations to Didi in exchange for an 18% stake in the combined company. Travis Kalanick personally flew to Beijing to sign the surrender documents, marking the most significant defeat of an American technology company in Chinese history. The final numbers told the story of complete strategic domination. Didi was processing over 20 million rides per day across 400 Chinese cities, while Uber China was struggling to process 2 million daily rides in fewer than 60 cities. Didi's market share had reached 87%, making them more dominant in China than Google was in global search. Jane Liu had not only defeated Uber, she had absorbed them, turning their technology, their drivers, and their remaining customers into assets for continued Chinese market expansion. Within months of the acquisition, former Uber drivers were wearing Didi uniforms, and former Uber customers were using Didi apps, as if the American invasion had never happened. The aftermath of Didi's victory sent shockwaves through Silicon Valley and established the template for how Chinese companies could defeat American tech giants on their home turf. Jean Liu's strategy became a masterclass taught in business schools worldwide. Combine aggressive subsidies with superior local knowledge, build ecosystem partnerships rather than standalone products, hire for cultural understanding rather than just technical skills, and most importantly, never underestimate the power of national pride in business competition. For Travis Kalanick, the China defeat marked the beginning of the end of his Uber reign. Within a year, investor pressure from the failed China expansion contributed to his resignation as CEO. For Jean Liu, victory in the Uber war was just the beginning. Didi used their dominant position to expand into food delivery, financial services, and autonomous vehicle development, eventually becoming one of the world's most valuable private companies with a market valuation exceeding $50 billion. The ride-hailing war had ended, but the empire Jean Liu built from that victory was just getting started, proving that sometimes the best way to compete with global giants is to know your own backyard better than they ever could.